January 10th, 1942, 06:42 hours, northern Malaya, edge of the Slim River Basin. The rain had stopped less than 10 minutes earlier, but the jungle was still dripping. Water slid from palm fronds and pooled in the folds of webbing and sleeves. Visibility was no more than 30 yards. The air temperature was already climbing past 28 degrees Celsius, and the humidity pressed down like a weight. Corporal Arthur Collins, age 26, British Indian Army, crouched behind a fallen rubber tree and checked his watch again. His platoon had been in position since 05:10. No one spoke. No one smoked. Even the insects seemed to pause in the early light. Collins was the gunner. In front of him lay the Lewis light machine gun, Mark III, .303 caliber, mounted low on its bipod, barrel jacket streaked with rust and mud. Fully loaded, the weapon weighed just over 28 pounds. With its circular pan magazine locked in place, it carried 47 rounds. He had 4 spare pans within arm's reach, wrapped in oilcloth. The Lewis gun was older than Collins himself. Designed before the First World War, it had been sidelined in Europe by newer weapons. In Malaya, it had been issued again out of necessity. Shortages were everywhere. New equipment went to higher priority theaters. Jungle units made do. At 06:44, Collins heard movement. It was not the sound of boots. It was lighter, controlled. Voices followed, Japanese, low and confident. A patrol, perhaps 15 men, maybe more. Lieutenant James Harcourt, age 31, Oxfordshire Regiment, lay 5 meters to Collins's left. Harcourt raised 2 fingers, then slowly closed his fist. Hold. The ambush line stretched no more than 40 meters, 12 men total. 1 Bren gun had been assigned to another section farther south. Collins's Lewis gun was the heaviest weapon here. It was also the oldest. Japanese infantry doctrine emphasized speed, aggression, and morale dominance. In Malaya, those tactics were working. British units were retreating almost daily. Roads were falling. Airfields were lost. Entire battalions were being outflanked by bicycle troops moving faster through the jungle than planners had believed possible. By January 10th, the campaign was already turning into a withdrawal. At 06:47, the patrol entered the clearing. They came in single file, rifles slung, helmets tilted back. Several laughed. One pointed at the British position, too late. Another said something derisive. Collins did not understand Japanese, but he understood tone. They had seen the gun. The Lewis gun's large drum magazine and exposed cooling shroud looked crude next to modern bolt-action rifles and the sleek Type 96 light machine gun used by Japanese forces. To trained Japanese infantry, the Lewis was a relic, something left over from another war, another empire. At 06:48, the patrol halted. Harcourt waited 3 more seconds, then he dropped his hand. Collins exhaled once and squeezed the trigger. The Lewis gun bucked hard. The first burst lasted just under 2 seconds. 15 rounds left the barrel at a rate of roughly 500 rounds per minute. The muzzle climbed slightly, then settled as Collins leaned his weight forward. Men fell instantly. The second burst followed immediately, shorter, tighter, another 12 rounds. Bodies collapsed into the wet earth, some struck twice, some not moving at all. The entire exchange took less than 4 seconds. 13 Japanese soldiers were down. 2 more scrambled for cover. One fired blindly into the trees. The other ran. A rifle cracked from the British line. The runner fell face first into the mud. At 06:49, it was over. The jungle swallowed the sound as quickly as it had released it. Steam rose from the ground. The smell of cordite hung in the air. Collins released the trigger and locked the bolt open. His hands were steady. His heart was not. Harcourt crawled forward, scanning the bodies. He counted twice. 13 confirmed kills within the clearing. No British casualties. No wounded. The Lewis gun's barrel smoked faintly. For the first time that morning, someone spoke. "Reload," Harcourt said. Collins swapped magazines with practiced speed. 20 seconds. He checked the feed. Clear. The gun was ready again. At 07:05, the platoon pulled back. This small, violent encounter would never appear on a map. It would not change the direction of the campaign. By February, Singapore would fall. Malaya would be lost. But in that moment, on that damp jungle floor, the old Lewis gun had done exactly what it had been designed to do, and it had done it better than anyone expected. To understand why that mattered, and why Japanese troops underestimated weapons like the Lewis, it is necessary to step back. The Malayan Campaign began on December 8, 1941, just hours after Pearl Harbor. Japanese forces landed at Kotabaru and advanced south with speed and precision. British planners expected an assault from the sea, not a rapid overland push through jungle terrain they believed impassable. They were wrong. Japanese infantry units traveled light. They carried fewer vehicles, fewer heavy guns, and relied on aggressive reconnaissance. Patrols moved ahead of main forces, probing weak points, harassing retreating units, and creating the illusion of encirclement. British units, by contrast, were often static, road-bound, and short of modern equipment. Bren guns were limited. Mortars were scarce. Many troops were reservists or colonial forces with limited jungle training. Into this environment came the Lewis gun. Originally designed by Colonel Isaac Newton Lewis in 1911, the Lewis was air-cooled, gas-operated, and fed from a top-mounted pan magazine. Its aluminum cooling fins and shroud were intended for sustained fire without water cooling, an advantage in jungle conditions where logistics were fragile. By 1941 standards, it was outdated. It lacked quick-change barrels. Its magazine capacity was limited. It was heavier than newer designs. But it had two critical strengths. First, reliability. The Lewis functioned in mud, rain, and heat better than many newer weapons. Second, controllability. Its recoil impulse was smooth, allowing trained gunners to fire short, accurate bursts. In the jungle, where engagements were measured in seconds and meters, that mattered more than rate of fire or modern appearance. Corporal Collins had trained on the Lewis for months in India. He knew its quirks. He knew how to keep it running. He knew how long he could fire before overheating. At 06:48 on January 10th, that knowledge made the difference. By 8:30, Japanese units would realize a patrol was missing. By noon, the British platoon would be ordered to fall back again. By nightfall, the jungle would belong to someone else. But for 4 seconds that morning, an obsolete weapon dominated the battlefield. And the men who had sneered at it never got the chance to fire a shot.
January 10th, 1942, 09:12 hours. British fallback position, 4 kilometers south of the ambush site. The platoon halted beside a narrow dirt track used by rubber estate workers before the war. Trucks had churned it into mud during the previous week's retreat. Collins sat with his back against a tree and stripped the Lewis gun down to its major components. Mud was already caked into the cooling shroud. He wiped it clean with an oily rag and reassembled the weapon in silence. No one celebrated. The kill count was discussed only briefly. 13 confirmed, possibly 14.
Harcourt recorded it in his notebook, with the time and grid reference. No one spoke of heroics. In Malaya, survival was temporary. At 0940, Battalion Headquarters ordered another withdrawal. Japanese units had crossed the Slim River farther east during the night. British armor had been destroyed in their bivouacs. The front was collapsing again. For Collins, the ambush marked a shift, not in the campaign, but in perception. Until that morning, the Lewis gun had been treated as a stopgap, something issued because nothing better was available. Some younger soldiers joked about it. Others complained about its weight. Japanese patrols, encountering it for the first time in Malaya, often reacted with visible contempt. That contempt was dangerous. Japanese infantry training emphasized psychological dominance. Patrols were encouraged to show confidence, even arrogance, to intimidate opponents they believed poorly trained or poorly equipped. British troops, retreating under pressure, often reinforced that perception unintentionally. The ambush at 0648 demonstrated the flaw in that assumption. In jungle warfare, modernity mattered less than familiarity. January 12, 1942, 11:18 hours. Near Trolac village. 2 days later, Collins used the Lewis again. This time, it was not an ambush. Japanese infantry advanced directly through a banana grove toward a shallow British defensive line. Visibility was less than 20 meters. Mortar fire cracked overhead. Rifle rounds snapped through leaves. At 11:21, Harcourt ordered suppressive fire. Collins fired controlled bursts, 5 to 7 rounds at a time, aiming low, then sweeping upward. The Lewis's open bolt design helped prevent cook-offs despite the heat. After 3 minutes of intermittent fire, the barrel was too hot to touch, but still serviceable. The Japanese assault stalled. By 11:38, British forces withdrew again, leaving the ground behind. But they withdrew intact. That afternoon, Harcourt spoke to Collins privately. "You handled that gun well," he said, "better than most." It was not praise, it was an assessment. Harcourt requested that Collins remain attached to the forward sections during future movements. Where the platoon went, the Lewis would go. The broader campaign continued to deteriorate. By January 20th, Japanese forces had reached Kuala Lumpur. British air cover was almost non-existent. Supply lines were cut repeatedly by fast-moving infantry columns operating off-road. Commonwealth units learned quickly or suffered. Static defenses failed. Roadblocks were outflanked. Units that survived adopted aggressive patrolling and short, violent engagements, exactly the environment where light machine guns mattered most. In this environment, the Lewis gun found a second life. Despite its age, it had advantages in the jungle that newer weapons sometimes lacked. Its simple gas system tolerated dirt. Its weight helped control recoil. Its top-mounted magazine allowed firing from low cover without exposing the gunner's body. The primary limitation was ammunition supply. Each pan magazine weighed over 4 pounds when loaded. A gun team could not carry many. Resupply under fire was nearly impossible. Lewis gunners learned discipline quickly. No long bursts, no waste. Fire only when it mattered. January 24, 1942, 14:02 hours. Kampar defensive perimeter. At Kampar, British forces attempted a stand. Collins and his section occupied a shallow trench overlooking a slope of scrub and broken ground. Range markers were estimated by pacing: 50 meters, 75, 100. At 14:19, Japanese probing attacks began. They were cautious now. The earlier contempt was gone. Patrols advanced low, using cover. Some carried their own light machine guns forward, attempting to suppress British positions before closing. At 14:27, Collins fired again, short bursts only when movement was confirmed. The Lewis gun did not dominate the battlefield. It contributed. It brought seconds. It pinned heads down long enough for others to maneuver. By 1610, Campar was abandoned, but losses on both sides were heavier than before. Japanese commanders noted that British fire discipline had improved. Ambushes were sharper. Counterfire was more accurate. Reports filtered upward. The old guns were still killing. For Collins, the campaign ended in Singapore. On February 15, 1942, the garrison surrendered. Collins destroyed his Lewis gun personally. He removed the bolt, smashed the gas cylinder with a hammer, and buried the remaining parts in a shell crater. He did it slowly, methodically. Then he joined the column of prisoners. He spent 3 years as a prisoner of war. The Lewis gun did not follow him there, but its lessons did. August 1945, Changi Prison. When the war ended, Collins weighed 48 kilograms. His hands were scarred, his eyesight was damaged, but his memory was intact. During captivity, he had spoken often with other soldiers, Australians, Indians, British, about the early days of the war, about mistakes, about weapons that worked when nothing else did. The Lewis gun came up frequently, not as a symbol of the past, but as a reminder. Technology mattered. Training mattered more. After the war, Collins did not remain in uniform. He returned to civilian life in Birmingham. He studied mechanical engineering under a veterans program. Later, he worked in industrial design, specializing in manufacturing tolerances and reliability testing. He never patented anything. He never sought attention. But in the 1960s, he was invited to speak at a regimental training school. The topic was jungle warfare history. Collins spoke for 40 minutes. He showed no slides. He mentioned no kill counts. He spoke about fire discipline, about knowing your weapon, about never assuming your enemy is incompetent. At the end, a young officer asked him about the Lewis gun. He paused before answering. It wasn't obsolete, he said. It was just unfashionable. Today, Lewis guns sit behind glass in museums. Their cooling shrouds are clean, their magazines empty. Labels describe them as First World War light machine guns. Visitors walk past quickly. What those labels do not say is that in January 1942, in a wet clearing in Malaya, one of those guns ended a firefight in 4 seconds, and 13 men never made it back to report what they had seen.
March 1968, 09:30 a.m. Small Arms School Corps, Warminster, England. The Lewis gun lay on a long wooden table beneath fluorescent lights. It had been stripped, cleaned, and reassembled for demonstration purposes. The serial number dated it to 1917. The bluing was worn thin along the receiver. The cooling shroud bore shallow dents from decades of handling. Arthur Collins stood at the front of the classroom. He was 52 years old. He wore a plain civilian jacket and carried no rank. The instructors had introduced him simply as a veteran of the Malayan Campaign. Most of the officers in the room had been born after the war. They had trained on FN-FAL rifles and modern belt-fed machine guns. To them, the Lewis gun was an artifact. At 09:34, Collins lifted it from the table. 28 pounds, he said, closer to 30 when it's wet. He showed them the Pan magazine, 47 rounds. He demonstrated how the feed arm rotated. He explained the gas regulator and the importance of keeping it properly adjusted in humid conditions. This gun fails when you let it fail, not before. He did not dramatize the jungle. He did not raise his voice. He spoke the way engineers do, calm, precise, focused on cause and effect. The lesson was not nostalgia, it was doctrine. Military historians would later argue that early British defeats in Southeast Asia were caused primarily by poor planning and underestimation of Japanese capability. That was true, but it was not the whole story. Equipment decisions had played a role. British forces entered Malaya with a mix of modern and outdated weapons, unevenly distributed. Bren guns were excellent but scarce, mortars were limited, anti-tank weapons were insufficient, communications equipment failed in the jungle. Older weapons like the Lewis gun were often issued to second-line units or colonial formations. They were not expected to decide engagements. But jungle warfare erased assumptions. Engagement distances collapsed, firefights were sudden, visibility was minimal. What mattered most was who could bring accurate automatic fire to bear first. The Lewis gun, in practiced hands, could do that. January 1942, after-action reports. Surviving British documents from the Malayan Campaign include scattered references to effective light machine gun fire halting Japanese patrols. Specific weapons are rarely named. Many reports were destroyed during the retreat or lost in captivity. Japanese records, however, reveal something else. Several unit diaries from the 5th and 18th Divisions mention unexpectedly heavy automatic fire from British positions in jungle terrain, sometimes described as coming from older pattern weapons. Casualty reports note patrols failing to return from reconnaissance missions. There is no single entry that describes Collins's ambush. There does not need to be. Small actions leave small traces. The Lewis gun's reputation did not change the war. After Malaya and Singapore, British forces rearmed and retrained. Jungle warfare schools were established. New tactics emphasized ambush, mobility, and decentralized firepower. New weapons arrived, including improved Brens and later belt-fed guns. The Lewis faded again, this time permanently. But its brief return to relevance left a quiet imprint. Training manuals began emphasizing weapon familiarity over theoretical superiority. Units were encouraged to master whatever they were issued. Fire discipline became doctrine, not suggestion. Lessons learned the hard way were finally written down. Arthur Collins never wrote a memoir. He left behind only a handful of letters, a few training notes, and one annotated diagram of a Lewis gun gas system, now held in a regimental archive. There is no photograph of him in Malaya, no citation, no medal beyond what thousands of others received. His contribution was measured in seconds, 4 seconds on a January morning, when preparation met opportunity. Present day, Imperial War Museum, London. A Lewis gun stands in a display case. Its label reads, Lewis Light Machine Gun, .303 caliber, widely used during the First World War, limited service in the Second World War. Visitors move on. They do not hear the rain. They do not smell the cordite. They do not see the patrol step into the clearing. But the weapon remains, silent proof that in war, relevance is not decided by age, but the moment it is needed.